Nutrimedical Report. We have Tim Alexander here, Lord Sterling, and his blog, europe.business.blogspot.com, with one Ask for the Business. Tim, what's the latest news? What's going on?
Well, we are in kind of a state of transition or anxious waiting to see what's going to happen in Yemen. There has not been, of course, the resupply ship, the humanitarian supply ship that the Iranians are sending to Yemen has not yet arrived. They have a guided missile destroyer and another military support ship waiting nearby to join with the resupply ship. They have announced that they're planning to set up field hospitals in Yemen, which are desperately needed, according to the UN. A senior Iranian commander has said that attacking the Iranian aid ship or trying to stop it, search it, will start a regional war.
Wow.
So it remains to be seen. I mean, they have said very clearly that they have reached the end of their rope in terms of patience, and they've drawn a line in the sand. They intend to dock this ship in a port that's under the control of what the West calls the rebels. It was really the forces that supported the elected president before a coup overthrew him and replaced him with a Saudi-backed president who was then overthrown. It's a mess. It's a proxy war between Iran and its allies, Syria, Russia, China, and so forth on one side, and the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf Arab Cooperative Council, the conservative monarchies on the other side. And it takes that ship a while to go from the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, to Aden, and beyond Aden to dock. And we'll probably know in the next 24 hours or something if it's going to dock peacefully, or if the Saudi Air Force or Navy or a combination thereof will attack it, or if the United States will attack it or try to board it. If it does, then it could get real messy real quick, and it could literally trigger a global economic collapse, if nothing else.
Well, I remember I predicted this in advance, which, of course, is one of the signs that I'm speaking prophetically, that the very first sign of the move, to the quickening, I call, toward the ultimate, which is an international peace treaty in the Middle East, a cashless system where cash is gotten rid of, because they've already talked about the fact that they, for the last 3 years, they talked about bailing in money starting in Cyprus. Now, policies have spread to the British banks, the Canadian banks, as well here in America. They're actually talking about the fact they can't maintain the interest rate as low as they are, and they can't raise it unless they get rid of cash. I'm saying in advance of it happening that the final event that's going to propel a peace treaty in the Middle East will be the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And it may be temporary, but it's going to be shocking enough to the world economy. It'll force things to get rocking and rolling.
Well, if in fact there is an interference and our attack and our attempt to board the Iranian ship, I don't believe, based on the comments, that the Iranians are going to back down. If you follow what they kind of say and how they've been acting, they've been kind of careful in what they've said, but they're pretty far out on the limb on this one. They're saying, if you interfere with this will cause a regional war. And they're not pulling punches on it. And
okay, what do you think will happen
in Syria, it really depends on which source you're going to.
Well, yeah.
On one hand, the Syrian government has really been kicking butt. On the other hand, there's a battle area that's very crucial for them that they can't afford to lose, and it's hard to say. I can't hardly pronounce this name. It's an Arab name, Qalaamaun. You know how to pronounce that, Dr. Bill?
How do you spell it again? Let me see.
Yeah. Qalamunm. It's a region in Syria.
Qalamun.
Qalamun, that sounds good to me.
Qalamun.
Yeah. Unofficially, the number of dead in the Syrian war is 200,000, most of them civilians. 6.5 million civilians have been forced to leave their homes. 3.5 million have fled, mostly to neighboring countries. 1.5 million are in Lebanon. Hezbollah and the Syrian army have been fiercely engaged with Syrian rebels in eastern Lebanon, Syrian border areas in the how do you pronounce that, hills? These are pretty rugged hills and roads. They smuggle. It favors smuggling, and it's the last natural barrier before reaching Damascus. And if they lose that battle, it could be the beginning of the end for Assad. On the other hand, I don't see the Syrians.
I don't think the Russians can permit that to happen.
I don't believe they will permit it. I don't believe the Iranians will permit it. But what I am saying is that battle is rather key. And see, here's what's happened: the West, Israel, the United States, the Qataris, the Saudis have been doubling down, and each time they double down, the Syrians, and with a little help from Hezbollah and the Iranians and the Russians, are kicking their butts, and then they double down again, and they have almost infinite money supply. They are bringing in just enormous numbers of basically poor Muslims that they're paying a lot of money to fight. The Syrians aren't fighting hardly anybody from Syria. They're fighting a mercenary army, okay?
But they're pretty ragtag. This army has been cut off. Apparently it's funded by King Salman of Saudi Arabia. These are foreign fighters. And they're already cut off, so their supply lines are shot. And when you have a supply line shot, ground troops are dead. They might as well be dead, because if you don't have food, water, and fuel, you're done. And weapons, bullets, you're done. You can sit there and you look like you're an army, but you aren't. You're basically a sitting duck waiting to be slaughtered to death. And that's the problem. You see, one of the things about America is we're able to do supply lines and project force anywhere in the world. Nobody, including Russia or China, can do that. They want to do it. Maybe a decade from now, China might be able to project to some extent. Russia can't, which is why they have relatively small military, and they're all advanced special forces, which are very powerful and very good, but they're tiny compared to America, and they can't project the force around the world. And the problem is these countries, when Saudi Arabia hires these people and puts them a lot of money on the deck and lots of weapons, if they aren't able to do the logistics, their army becomes useless. And that's the problem. They can call in airstrikes, but unless you have boots on the ground, you cannot control the territory you supposedly you're trying to take over.
Yep.
It's just like, this is we call military logistics. It just doesn't happen.
Well,
so in other words, it's a guaranteed failure.
Yemen is really in danger of starving, and they have so many people injured, and that's what the Iranians are trying to address. The Saudis would love to send their army in, and they're using the 5-day truce period to pack a lot more troops on the border. But they're still going to have the problem they faced about a week and a half ago, when they gave orders for about 10,000 of some of their best troops to cross the border. And the troops said, nah, we're going home. You have to know their mindset, and these people are paid, and they figure they're not going to be paid to go in and kill fellow Arabs. There's about 4 million Yemeni people working in Saudi Arabia, and that could get real hairy for the Saudi government if they invade.
Exactly. Amazing. Back in a moment with Tim. Welcome back, and Tim, one of the big things that's going on is a big mile-crossed asteroid zipping past the Earth, and of course waving as it goes by, says, "Almost killed ya. Have a nice day." That's today, right? People need to realize, I took care of people working at U.S. Space Command, and by the way, there's an entire amount of debris out there. We have, hundreds of thousands of fragments all the way down to the size of a pea. Many of them whipping around at, 25, 30,000 miles an hour, which, if you're a satellite, and you remember there's only about 1,200 satellites that are actually still working, but there's around 5,000 satellites, and lots of them, the Chinese 2 years ago took a satellite and blew it up with a kinetic weapon just to test if they had anti-satellite weapons, which they do. And NASA warned them not to do it, but they did anyway, which is very stupid because it creates basically shards of material that make space travel very, very dangerous, because you're whipping up at high velocities, and these fragments are flying along at 20, 30,000 miles an hour. They can rip through the side of a spacecraft like it's butter.
They just bounce right off. Right.
Yeah. It means that basically you're not going to be able to see going.
A few years ago, we had a really bad tornado in this area, and a lot of people were killed. And there was a church a few miles from my home, and there was a small board stuck into the concrete of the church tower. And it was just amazing. It was just a piece of scrap wood, but it was driven by several 100-mile-per-hour force. And there have been many cases where straw has been found driven into telephone poles. Now, normally a straw, if you walked up to a telephone pole with a piece of straw and tried to force that straw into the pole, what would happen? Well, it would just crumble, right? But when you add a lot of velocity to it, it actually penetrates the telephone pole. Now, if you're in space and you're seeing something that's flying at, say Mach, if you try to use a Mach number, which is fairly low, maybe Mach 20 times the speed of sound on Earth, and it's often much faster than that. So even a tiny scrap of junk can literally penetrate a spacecraft. And one of the big problems we have is we have so much junk, and sometimes it's just literally trash that's been expelled from, like the European Space Center, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, eventually that falls to Earth, but until it does, it's moving very fast and potentially is very lethal.
I'll tell you what I need is we're going to need to have force shields around objects that fly into space. The first is what's called a magnetic force shield. The second one is called a torsion field shield, which you travel at sublight or above light speeds, we call warp speeds. You have to form what's called a torsion force shield around a spacecraft, because a high velocity particle, even a photon of energy at near light speeds, has almost infinite mass and will rip right through your spacecraft. So this is something that the CERN project is developing. And I kind of, once in a while, I'll pop a little bit of information that I know, and the other 90%. Most of it won't be publicly published until the late 21st or early 22nd century that I'm talking about. People say, well, how do you know this stuff, Deagle? That's also another story I'm not going to tell you until the appropriate time. But I know things that no one has ever published, written, or published in human history. And people need to know.
Well, I know some things that I've been involved in that were earth-shaking and revolutionary, but because the right people weren't behind them to make billions off of them, they didn't get followed through. And I'm talking about military technology and so forth.
You mentioned also Dr. McNamara.
There is so much suppressed technology, from literally hypersonic around-the-world flight using basically the magnetic fields of the Earth, this propulsion system. It's kind of based on Tesla's system, to free energy, or almost free energy. We're in a world and a universe that we shouldn't have to pay public utilities for electricity or natural gas. There's no reason on this earth why we should be pumping oil out of the ocean, the earth, below the oceans and all over, and polluting the environment by burning it. There is absolutely no reason on earth why we should be building nuclear power plants with the most dangerous substances on earth, plutonium and enriched uranium, to boil water, to turn the steam generator to make electricity, when we could do that with a small unit in our backyard that would be totally safe. And other than the cost of the unit, which would be cheap, about like a central air conditioning system, we'd have all the free energy we ever wanted to heat or cool our house and anything else, and to run our cars. We're being exploited by a small group of families, the global banking cartel families, that are also the owners of the energy companies. And, we fight wars over energy. This is all a scam. You have a small group of monsters at the top that want wars and depressions, and they're so evil, they want to inflict harm on people.
Right.
And, of course, we have population reduction programs running. Some of the things in the news lately, Monsanto has been taking various hits, and various countries and so forth have as of the last month or so, have moved against them in various ways. But, they're still pumping poison in this country. You can't drink water unless it's been purified out of a public water source that's based on a river or something that doesn't have a certain amount of Monsanto's wonderful products in them. And as you've talked many times, it's designed to change our DNA to kill us, essentially.
Tim, did you say Mount Satan? Is that what you said?
Mount Satan. Yeah.
That's my new term. I switch and turn and everything. I'm like a very bad 63-year-old, and just take the 60 off. I'm a 3-year-old that's old. And old, smart, and has a bad attitude. How's that? And I can't be taught now because I'm not a kid.
That's me. That's me, too. I want to tell you. When I go in the sands, some of the gals are, how you doing today? And, of course, they know my response, and I say, fat and sassy. And, of course, they think that's quite funny. But
well,
by the way,
sassy. How's
the
that?
last time I was on, I talked about Harper and what a fascist the Canadian Prime Minister is. The UK, the newly re-elected Prime Minister David Cameron, he's now suggesting that those who obey the law won't be left alone by the state if they engage in anything the government deems to be hate speech, including bigotry, and let's put parentheses around that, and potentially criticism of homosexuality and feminism. In other words, political correctness is going to be written into the law in the UK, and of course this certainly will include any criticism of Israel because the broad term anti-Semitic speech will be a crime. And so if you criticize Israel,
that means we must do our maximum criticism then. So I call Israel, it's a real hell.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. I'm not shutting up.
No. In fact, if anything, it makes us more determined to do the reverse.
Yeah.
And Tim, I'd like you to kind of fill us in on what's going on in terms of what's happening, because people need to understand just how desperately crazy things are.
Well, we were just, talking off air about Japan, and as you said, both Brazil and India have offered Japan a big hunk of land. The Brazilians have offered them a hunk of land at least as big as Japan itself is.
Right.
This Fukushima event is in the process we destroying Japan and killing.
Well, it's actually destroyed. What we have to realize is that we often don't want to kind of touch on the fact that we're not starting the tribulation, we're in it. We're in what's called the birth pangs phase. There's different phases. Yeah. Like you're a historian. Before the First World War and Second World War, the economic phases of war started 20 years before World War I even. Same with World War II.
Look at World War II. I mean, It was actually going in Asia for 37, and it was only late 39 that you had the phony war that went into about late 40, and then it began a real shooting war in Europe. So it's not like throwing a light switch. A lot of people in America saw it like throwing a light switch when the Japs attacked us on December 7th, 1941. But in reality, World War II had been going on piecemeal and in various places for several years. And Pope Francis, and I usually disagree with him, but I completely agree with him when he said World War III has already begun. It's just piecemeal. And it
right.
certainly has. And what you're seeing in Japan, we've talked before of the Death Star approaching and so forth, and I don't have any expertise in that area. I'd like more proof and so forth, but yet it fits, because a big key question
I have firsthand
had is why in the hell are the people in Japan, and the Japanese are kind of like the Russians, they're very proud of their culture, their civilization, their language, their people, their history, and why in the hell are they allowing this to happen in Japan?
Well, the Japanese have a thing called shame. Okay, I was watching O'Reilly, and of course the comedian up in Santa Barbara that works with him and does often what's called pinhead conferences. Cracked a joke about robotic dogs in Japan, and you have to if you shame a robotic dog in Japan, they commit what's called popakau, which is basically a form of suicide. So the Japanese are not going to lose face. And it's losing face to admit that they're already dead. They've killed the culture. In fact, Japanese women are aborting like crazy or getting permanently sterilized so they won't have a child that's a monster. We're not talking about something that's going to happen. We're not talking about the death of the great orca whales so there's no singing in the North Pacific. We're not talking about the loss of the salmon run, or like these are future events that some future time are going to happen. They're happening right now. They're happened. ED, just like the Chernobyl, which is a wormwood, which of course we talked about this the other day with our prophetic announcements of the final warning with Carl Gallups. What people need to realize, and what we're speaking here, and I'm speaking here not just as Dr. Deagle, scientist, environmentalist, charter member of Greenpeace, nuclear expert, radiochemist, biologist, etc. I'm speaking as a prophet. We are in the birth pangs now. Now things are going to really start speeding up when they bring out the economic collapse, when they bring out the total market of the beast system where they get rid of cash, because they don't want you to have cash in your pocket. And the fact they're not fixing Fukushima Daiichi is a very giant red flag saying anything. For example, in Chernobyl, people understand they brought in like 1 million people to kind of bury this. And they dropped in giant, Russian helicopters to drop concrete to create a concrete sarcophagus, which, by the way, is breaking down, so they have to rebuild it or it's going to re-release a lot of radiation there. These were graphite nuclear reactors, and I understand the technology intimately. The problem that people don't understand here that's so serious is that it's not going to kill the population of Earth. It is killing them already. People just don't know. They're like the bull elephant that's been shot in the head and they're running 5 miles, but they're in fact actually the frontal lobes and most of the brain is dead. It's just the spinal cord reflex is continuing. We see that with the Japanese, where they've been off to territory the size of Brazil in Brazil 2 years ago, and now they're actually closed the deal a month ago. We have the area of Kerala, India.
They have closed the deal?
Yeah, they closed the deal last month. Yep. And so they're moving basically corporations are moving factories, people are of wealth are leaving Japan. We've had a massive flood of Japanese coming here to California, and by the way, we aren't getting radiated. I check our radiation detectors, our radiation levels are fine, and people need to understand this. The ocean waters are going to get the highly mobile things like tuna, but even our local fish don't have significant radiation. I know, I check them with my radiation detector. What's hitting is British Columbia, and then, of course, the airborne. By the time it hits North America, those airstreams are 26 to 30,000 feet. They're not hitting the lower population zones yet. What they're doing is they're zipping over the mountains, diving down to the Midwest. They're heading to a place called Indiana. That's where you live, right? And then they're going back up to the Northeast. So that's why last year they had actually radioactive snow in Indiana in the wintertime.
Cool.
So people need to grasp what's really going on here in terms of, and there's also pulsing of high-level radiation in a trans-equatorial air current that carries 300 times more water than the Amazon every day, that's pulsing toward the west coast of Australia, toward Brisbane and New Zealand. People think, well, the southern hemisphere doesn't get hit. There's also an oceanic current, contrary to Dr. Helen Caldecott, that doesn't know this marine ecology and what we call the astrophysics and of the planet. She doesn't understand this, that there's a current that carries it directly from Japan across the equator and then hits Ecuador. So people say, I want to move to South America. I think not. The air currents aren't going to hit you, but the water currents will.
I agree with you, disagree with you. You're right, but that hits the Pacific coast of South America. It doesn't hit Uruguay, Brazil.
That's right. It doesn't go that
Argentina.
further south. Precisely. And also the air currents don't hit there. We're talking about ocean. So ocean currents, the Kuroshio, is hitting British Columbia and northern Washington state, and it's killing sea life there in the intertidal region. The air currents are not. Now, people understand there are two different things here. And the ocean currents basically are also transpolar. So they're zipping over the poles and hitting Eastern Europe, and they thought a reactor 2 years ago was gone. It was actually not a Chernobyl-style reactor that was going in, they thought, in the Czech Republic. It was actually radiation from Fukushima and Daiichi crossing the poles. And also, by the way, these radiotoxins massively speed up the loss of the ozone layer. It says in the Bible, in that day, the crops, the fields, of course, we're talking about grassy plants like wheat and corn, will turn white because it is the time of harvest. That is a biological sign of what I call the end-time plagues. And again, remember, I'm a blood descendant of Moses, so I'm saying this, pronouncing it now. That's a sign the ozone layer is going to go poof. And it says that ozone layer will go poof for 5 months, so the death will run away from them. In other words, it'll be dangerous to be outside during that time, and any grassy plants will be completely killed. And this is our biology research people have discovered that 45 minutes of a 75% plus destruction of the ozone layer for 1 hour will destroy all the grassy plants it's exposed to on the earth. 1 hour. Yeah. They'll just wither and all of a sudden you'll see the fields turn white. You say, where's our crops? Where's our wheat? Oh, it's all white. It must be time for harvest, because that's when the crops turn white.
Right.
But it's a harvest. It's a harvest of the human race. You see, it's the harvest of the human race. People don't get this. And as I said before, I prayed 3 weeks ago, and I said, God, I want to have the respect of all of my friends and relatives that think Deagle's just nuts. But I've been in actually these physical places, and I can give references and prove it. And God said, no, you don't. You don't want that respect, because the day that they respect and understand what you're saying is true and not just your musings or your schizophrenic insanity, which is not the case, is a day of gnashing of teeth and blood in the streets and violence and horror. People don't realize that if we repent before God, He'll protect us even from near-Earth objects like this giant asteroid zipping past us, waving at us, say, have a nice day, almost killed ya. I try to use dark humor. Sometimes I get through to people. They don't realize who and what I'm doing here and who I am, but they will someday. And welcome back. We have Chris Harris, our nuclear expert. Missed last week. Powerful 6.8 quake strikes northeast Japan. Not so good. And also the news report, why are transformers and power plants exploding? 2 nuclear power plants suffered from major electrical transformer faults. The Byron Station Unit number 1, LER, Byron Unit number 1 reactor trip resulted from a phase-to-phase fault on the 1E main power transformer. What's going on there? The India Point unusual event declared due to main transformer fire. What's happening, Chris? What's going on?
Well, this is interesting because sometimes the natural events are a little more unpredictable and more difficult to cope with than just typical failures of plant equipment. And what we got here, well, they're calling the 6.8 quake in Japan an aftershock of 3/11/11. This is just an aftershock, but it's still, that 6.8 is also one of the strongest that they've received in that area since 3/11/11, which was the date of Fukushima. And so it's still ringing. It hasn't stopped oscillating, hasn't stopped ringing. You brought up what you're discussing gravity waves and all, and the best analogy is from a mechanical engineering of mine is it's like a fluid flow. It could be, and the analogy would be to a fluid flow of differing densities. And in this case, it would be of gravity. But I'd like to just also talk about the transformers. And,
let's do that.
It's kind of unusual to see 2 major power plants also suffer from catastrophic faults on a very large power transformers, and within a relatively short period of time. And one of them is just happened last week, and then on the 9th, and then another one on March 3rd. And it is kind of, you remember we talked about that the solar activity can cause transformers to fail, and I'm wondering if that's what we're seeing. So, there wasn't a very hot day. The demand wasn't very high, and yet 2 transformers. And the one at Indian Point, by the way, that's in just 40 miles north of New York City on the Hudson River. That one failed very catastrophically. Fireballs were seen and smoke from 200 feet high all the way around, and that plant's going to be shut down for a long time until they can get that one repaired.
Right. Well, now, there's a couple of reasons why there would be transformer failures. The first is, of course, just old equipment that's not being replaced or properly checked, because there's a way of checking the transformers. You check the transformer fluid level, you check the transients to see if there's a change in the resistivity of the transformer, and if there's a resistivity change, it means it's about to fail. Those checks are probably not being done, so there's basically maintenance. The third is, and it's tied to the earthquakes and volcanoes, you knew that CERN shut down at the same time that the Nepal earthquake struck. Do you know why that was?
Why is that?
Okay, I'll explain this. And by the way, this is advanced hyperdimensional physics that if you're a PhD level physicist in Tier 1 science, you'll understand this. Otherwise, you won't. But I'm going to explain it in simple terms. Everybody, including if you had grade 3, will understand it. Space is 3 dimensions. Space-time is the 4th dimension. Space-time is embedded in the 5th dimension, which is called a Higgs or gravitonic field. Gravity waves basically create wormholes. So if you mapped out the galaxy and you wanted to have galactic travel or transporters or trade, you'd enter a gravity wave wormhole, basically. And just like the move that was out here recently last year that talked about traveling through a wormhole to a distant part of the galaxy, that's a very fact that advanced civilizations have to have a map of the actual highways in space-time called gravity wave wormholes. Now, when a gravity wave hits, it capacitates us because for every star there's 10,000 dwarf stars. And dwarf stars are highly dense. They're usually small enough that they have a very powerful magnetic field. For example, red dwarfs have 200 times the more magnetic field of our yellow dwarf star. And a gravity wave basically is a high-speed frequency energy wave that actually travels faster than the speed of light, and it can have all kinds of effects on geotectonics of the Earth, amplifying what we call the plasma physics of the actual Earth itself. Because remember, Earth is a nuclear reactor. It has 440 times more thorium than any other planet we know in our near part of our galaxy, the arm of our galaxy. So what happens is those gravity waves, they change the plasma physics so they can actually bump up the power. Just like if you have a CME, you have to shut down your reactors and your transformer lines and your power lines, because the power surge caused by the coronal mass ejection can actually blow your power lines and your step-down transformers. Well, the same thing goes when you pump up the energy of what's called a piezoelectric slip threshold of a earthquake fault line zone. It's been building up stress in the fault line zones over a period of months or years. When you hit it with enough energy to pump it up above that energy plateau so you can get what we call a piezoelectric slip, then you can get a major release of energy called an earthquake. My solution to the problem is to create what I call microquakes. And I know how to make what's called a plasma resonator, just like Nikola Tesla theorized, but I know how to build it. So if you have engineers out there, I know how to actually put these along a fault line to actually, it's almost like, you remember when you're getting noise-canceling headphones? It's the same principle. It's a noise-canceling system that would take a big quake that might be 9 and make it into microquakes. So you have, 5,000 microquakes a day, which you wouldn't even feel. What's happening when CERN was hit, it's a plasma ring, and it was hit with a change in the energy density of the field because of space-time, which is why when a coronal mass ejection hits, before the plasma and even the ultraviolet light hit Earth, the gravity wave coming from the sun with the release of the coronal mass ejection changes the T1 half, or the actual half-life of isotopes, because it changes what's called a space-time constant, so that you don't go faster than the speed of light, but you actually contract or expand space-time, which is the ultimate principle of gravity. Gravity is basically a curvature of space-time. Does that make sense?
It's good to be your student, Dr. Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm trying to explain this because it's really important people understand this. So, in other words, if you have a giant gravity wave, it can not only cause superquakes, just like this movie with The Rock that's going to play at the end of May called San Andreas. It's going to scare the bejesus out of Americans in California. What they need to understand is our California state governor is a moron, and if he consulted somebody like me who could marshal a panel of scientists who are already working on gravity analysis by measuring telluric forces across the fault line zones. The key here is using noise-canceling headphones to put in enough pulse wave energy to release the rock face interface energies so they could glide past each other by creating microquakes. That's how you solve the problem.
Are you partially talking about using waves to cancel waves, correct?
Yeah, what you do is you create what's called an energy displacement. You actually, what Nikola Tesla had is a device he could put in his lab pocket in New Jersey when he was doing research. And what you do is you take the device out, attach it to the pillar of the building. It would hit a pulse, and it would actually hear an echo back. It would give them the resonant harmonic frequency of the building, which is why when you have an earthquake, one building is standing and the next one is destroyed to pieces. The building that's destroyed had harmonic frequencies in the building structure that was harmonic with the frequency waves of the earthquake. So you create what's called giant waves, which the Scottish engineers discovered 300 years ago in Edinburgh, that you have to create bridges in such a way it doesn't create gravity waves, or we call giant waves, in the structure of the bridge itself. And you have to also walk out of sequence if you're an army walking over a bridge, because the giant waves created by an army walking over left, right will tear the bridge apart. So what you want to do is create enough left, right kind of frequencies to cause what we call piezoelectric entrainment of the crystals in the fault line, because every fault line has harmonic frequencies of a main frequency and sub-frequencies. And if you create harmonic entrainment of the plasma physics of the crystals, you'll release energy that'll cause a microquake. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know, when I was involved with stealth aerospace, one of the ways you can stealth an aircraft is acoustically, and you broadcast a frequency that basically cancels out the frequency of the sound of the engines.
Yeah, they do that with sonar under the water, and they also put dimples on the submarines. The best way is actually, the simplest way is to make a signature without the size of a bird, is to put a wire in the front leading the airfoil spaces of the aircraft and charge it up to millions of degrees to create a plasma field over the wing surfaces.
That's what the Russians have done.
Yeah, and that creates basically a signature so it's the size of a bird, but it's a Boeing 767 size, or as the Russians say, a Tupolev jet.
Loaded with missiles.
Loaded with missiles for you. Hello, Amerikanskis. Have a nice day. Nuclear warfare coming to you tomorrow.
God bless, guys.
A little humor sometimes gets it through to people. As I say, this is advanced science. You're not going to hear it elsewhere, just here at Nutrimedical.